So great to see all the names and faces here. My name is Jin Ding. I am a program manager at the International Women's Media Foundation. I have been working in kind of the grant world for about 8 years now. First started at the Pulitzer Center. I worked there for almost 6-7 years until last year. That I started, the DEI task force with them, and also was their last, when I left, I was the inclusion manager there. So currently at LMF, I manage LMF's grants and awards, as well as some emergency programming. So that's pretty much about me. And I'm also a member of Asian American Journalism Association. And I'll talk more after we start.
Thank you so much. Mike?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for including me in this conversation. It's my privilege to be with you. I've been the Alexia director for the past, this is my 8th year of running the competition. It's part of my job as a professor at Syracuse University. So I wear a couple hats, and with my hairline, hats are good. I came into teaching after about 30 years in the profession as a visual leader of one form or another. I've been a design director, visual director, picture editor, illustrations editor at National Geographic and the White House, and 5 newspapers. And for the last 10 years, I've also been an independent photography consultant working directly with photographers, mostly producing projects, many of which would be perfect for applying for grants with. Bodies of work, that's my thing in photography.
Amazing. Yes, so I just dropped the links if you're not familiar with IWMF or Alexia Grants. IWMF and Alexia Grants, every year they give out a lot of money. Alexia Grants actually has an application Mike, did it already?
It will open on Tuesday, on the 14th.
It'll open on Tuesday, and we're going to talk about this more, but for professionals, $20,000 is on the table, and that is a life-changing amount of money. So yes, please get into that. Feel free to use the chat to say where you're tuning in from. There were a bunch of questions already submitted, and I gave Jin and Mike a heads up on them, so they kind of have a sense of what people want to hear. If you didn't submit anything, it's totally fine. I want this to be as informal and as conversational as possible. And so I think I'll start with looking at the document of questions now. The first question that I saw that really, I think would be a good starting point is, what should be my first step in applying for grants? I don't know, whoever wants to take a stab at that.
Yeah, sure. I think, so I'm literally reading from a PowerPoint that I prepared earlier for AAJA last month, which exactly talked about this. So I think finding a match is really important. So what you are looking at is not only, it's kind of, you are using a dating app that you need to swipe on right, and your grant maker also need to swipe on right on you. So you both need to fit into each other's, criteria, and also knowing how your grant can be part of their grant portfolio as well. So part of the things I wanted you guys to look into, if it's the first time you ever apply for a grant, you want to look at where are you at with your project? Are you looking for support for your research or for your actual on the ground reporting or post-production? So for photographers, you might have a project that you've been working on for a number of years now, or just started researching. Really looking into whether or not this grant is for that stage is important. And then for the basic researches, you want to cover the requirement and look into who in the previous years that have been getting this grants. You probably for Mike's grant is a little bit different because you guys open this once a year, I think. For us, because it's rolling, you probably want to look into projects that we funded in the past 2 years instead of, or like 1 year, instead of looking into something that we have funded 5-6 years ago. And then I think another thing I would recommend you guys to look into are recent projects that are done on the same topic or in the same region or have some similarities with what you're pitching. So you will know, whether or not they have funded on the same thing in the past or how differently your approach is to the same topic compared with the previous one. And at the same time, looking into whether or not this is a region they have funded things before, to know first thing whether or not the grant maker has any knowledge about that field, or like looking into how you will talk about your project differently if you have researched the previous grant they've been made on a similar topic. And the third thing is who got their grants. This is a little bit I do want you guys to look into who got their grant to know whether or not there is someone you can talk to read your application, or everyone's grant application, in my opinion, has to be read by another person before you submit, because you have your own narrative in your mind and you want to send someone to have a little bit understanding of how the grant award works, and then read your application. So that person can be a previous grantee. So it'll be important if you look through the profiles on this website and trying to figure out whether or not you know someone or in your circle who have done grants in the past, to read it to see if there are obvious holes in your application.
And I know that was a lot of information at once. So if anyone, please feel free to, whenever you have a question about something that was said, to, just unmute yourself and ask away. Mike, did you want to add to that?
What I would offer is that the first thing is to assess your own work, and is it of a scope large enough that a grant might be interested in awarding you. Typically they are for more substantive, more larger efforts, not sort of in the picture story realm or the small subject realm. And then the second thing to consider is, are you willing to put in the work that it takes to apply for grants? Because it's not like, oh, I think I'll do that this afternoon kind of thing. It does take some effort that goes beyond what applying for most competitions involves.
And on that note, sorry to put you on the spot, Sierra, but Sierra King is one person who knows what it takes. She applies to grants often. She has been successful in, receiving money with grants. Sierra, can you share with people, just like the kind of work that Mike is talking about, it's not like turning an assignment. You start an assignment at 11 that's due at midnight, right? Please share with the class.
Yeah, it's definitely not one that you start the day of that it's due. I usually try to give myself a month's at minimum time to work through a grant and come up with a timeline from so if I know the deadline, then giving myself a month's time backwards from setting up application materials, getting someone to review it, like Jen said, and then also just reviewing my work. Like Mike said, do I have enough work, or does the person that is applying, do they have enough work to actually apply to the grant? And then just refining my overall, I guess, business or project budget is also good, to know that have your actual budget that you want to use the money for, because I think that's where a lot of people also get lost, is they know they need a substantial amount of money, but how are you actually going to use that money when you get it? And a lot of grants and applications, that's really where they hold their weight is have they put in time to actually understand how they're going to use the money rather than just it being something that's going to be dumped into their account and it can be placed anywhere.
Jen and Mike, do you have anything
Yeah.
to add to that?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on the two things. One is what Sirius talked about budget. So I think budget is often, for us at least, is like a section that in the entire application, people often just don't put enough thought into, and actually our committee look at that like in depth. So I would recommend everyone look at a budget as a roadmap of how you will approach the project that you're pitching. So the budget needs to align with what you're pitching and align with the scope. At the same time, really show how much thought you put in on this project and how you will make the project happen in your budget. Because I think like a lot of time, the budget doesn't really reflect on the work that it needs to be put in order to make that happen. And that just goes back to what Mike said about this, your own scope of work. I don't mind to get applications from people who are just out of college or like, you know, who don't have enough in their portfolio. But at the same time, I also know I wouldn't really want to bet on someone who do a feature documentary when they have only conducted like 5 minutes interviews in the past. So what that means, when you are pitching project, I don't have really encourage women journalists to go one step beyond where they are at right now. So it will be interesting to see you are pushing yourself, but at the same time, not dreaming something that you're completely have no evidence to show that you're capable of. So like combine the both would be interesting for us.
So Jen, this is Valerie. I wanted to piggyback off of that with a question. So when you see grant applications and someone is proposing a project, would you like to see like a preview of the project? Would you have like for them to have shots, I guess a small preview or a reel, highlight reel, like something small just so you can see where their head is in advance? Or are you just going through their portfolio to say, okay, they can pull this off? Or would you like to see something exactly relating to what they're proposing?
I don't need to see your reel for this entire project that you're pitching, because oftenly I know like for us to fund something that is overseas or is across the country, we don't need the journalist to already have been there, because it's a crazy amount of economic strength that we're putting on journalists if we're asking those. So what we are interested in is see your publishing history. Even you only have published with, you know, college papers, or if you have published with New York Times, that like you just need to show that, and then you'll need to tell me where you're taking this project to. So if you are publishing with, like you're planning to pitch this to Nat Geo, I hope you have some good contact there and the editor having some interest at least. If your previous work history has not involved any Nat Geo story. So that just to give you an example. We don't really need you to tell exact what you will be doing on this project, but I do want to see your previous history to back your plan on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, what I would say that both of these aspects go into understanding the uniqueness of each grant and whether you are a match for those. For the grants, there is a huge range out there. The Alexia, almost everyone who has gotten it in the 30 years has started on the project that they're proposing. And it's usually anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 through the project. So the work they're presenting shows that they're capable of it. And then the written part explains the narrative, the approach, what they're actually doing, and the importance of the project. So the proposal essentially is the foundational aspect for the work being seen. We award work that is going to be produced, typically. So if we're able to fund you enough so that you can finish a project or move it further down the road, that's our benefit. But we don't require a budget. And in fact, this year, because of the pandemic, we're not even requiring that you use this money for your project. If you have a more urgent need, and many of us do, then use it for that.
Great. Going down the list of questions, beyond confidence and tone of voice and a focus on the subject rather than self, are there any other vital things that should be considered in terms of the way the grant proposal itself is written?
The one thing that distinguishes successful proposals from those that aren't is clarity. If you, in the first paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, have a clear sense of what this project is about, and in this next section, you understand why that's important. In the third section, you understand how this project is going to be produced and why you are the person to produce that. And in the fourth section, here's what will result because of the project. And you can also include any partnerships that you formed to advance what you're striving to address. So it's really that structural approach is reading close to a couple thousand of them now, is what makes them stand out. And for what it's worth, on the alexiafoundation.org site, the photo stories section are the granted project, and the text that is with those stories is their proposal. So you can read 130, I think, proposals in that area.
Yeah, what Mike said is pretty much what we also want to see. I wanted the journalists to be able to explain and answer 3 questions: why this, why now, why you. So like you need to clearly tell us like stories that you want to report on, not only the issues, because I think a lot of the time journalists write beautifully about the climate change issue is really important in blah, blah, blah. And then I don't see the approach of what exactly the story you're going to report on, what kind of research has gone into the preparation, and how you're going to achieve that. And for photographers, we all know access to the community, access to the stories are critical. So if you don't have those explained well in your application, there are just like a lot of question marks when we read it.
On that note, in terms of the writing, the subject, someone asked, how much in-depth knowledge of the grant providers must you mention when you write? So for example, if I'm applying somewhere, I have an interview with New York Times, and they may ask, what do you like about the New York Times or whatever? Does that also happen with grants? And if so, like, do you include background knowledge that, I've been a fan of IWMF, or do you stick to the 3 things that you were saying, Jen?
I would recommend you stick to the 3 things you are saying. I understand everyone who spent the more than an hour to write that application probably is a fan of us in some way. I do want to know more of how you're gonna approach it, because I think that's the key. For us, it's important to journalists should probably try to think as a grant maker sometime, to think why I want to fund this. Because I wanted you to tell that story, and that story can be seen by people and can be viewed by people, can actually touch lives. So for me, it's important to see how you're going to approach that and achieve that.
And the way that you write it will indicate whether you're familiar with the grant you're applying for it and the work you submit. So
do you think it would be helpful, if someone was interested in the Alexia grant, for example, to reach out to previous folks for, advice or learn their work? Or does it change, what you all look for every year, or yeah.
You know, when I went to grad school at the University of Missouri, and at the time, still Pictures of the Year is judging is held there, and the then director of the competition told me I choose the winners who's going to win when I choose the judges. And the same is true for grants. So generally things will stay consistent, but only if the person choosing the judges is the same year to year. In the end, it's the judges that decide what gets chosen, not the contest itself. So in a way, if you look at who has judged the competitions, that's a better gauge of what kind of work is going to get responded to over time.
Yeah, for us, the committee is a mix of journalists from all sorts of background and even from different countries. So, and not all of them are judging in each round. But in general, for me, I think it's important for them to actually look into who are the ones getting the grants and not be intimidated and scared by it, because there are a lot of achieved journalists getting our Fund for Women Journalists grant, but there are also a lot of them don't have that frame. And I think it's important for journalists to look through those reporting we've done with them, but at the same time knowing we're always pursuing new ones. So yeah, I don't think reaching out to the journalists who have gotten the grant is very necessary, because like everyone has their own version of stories why they were chosen, but it's important to look at the reporting.
Another question, this one is from the chat. What distinguishes an application for a project that is especially timely, a prison reform? So, to add to that, how often does that weigh in consideration? Because right now we know what's going on around this country, and also, internationally, of, police brutality and things like that. Do you all, weigh that into consideration? Or is it, if a good project is a good project, it'll stand out?
I'm guessing, Jen, the nowness, the urgency is a higher priority for you than it might be for.
Because for Fund for Women Journalists grant, as an example, we do need you to have a timeline for the next 6 months to complete this grant. So which for us it means we need to know that your topic is timely. That's a nature. And if you're pitching something that are like you're gonna go on a reporting trip end of 2021, I probably would just tell you apply when you actually need it. Because for me or for our committee, it's important to see how we are funding the work that's not being reported right now, but needs to be reported right now. So that part of that is also because IMF doesn't really have, like we probably in total of the amount of we can give for grants are less than $500,000 a year. So in order to make that $500,000 really worthy, we wanted to make sure that every single dollar are spent on projects that the current media are not giving enough attention to. So less about, general COVID breaking stories, but of course about prison reform or about, incarceration. And we recently funded incarceration projects. And it's important to be timely.
So different ways to think about urgency, or I call it nowness. I mean, why is this relevant now? And I went from working as a picture editor of a daily newspaper to National Geographic. So from that daily grind of deadline to it took 2 years to produce a coverage from idea to print. The relevance had to stay the same for National Geographic stories. So for our grant, there is nowness for sure. Why should this be done this year? Why should this work continue now as opposed to this work is an important variable, but it's not as tuned to the news as it might be more at a societal level, or why is this significant to speak to now?
Yeah. Then I go back to my 3 questions: why this, why now, why you?
It's a good way to put it.
That's a great way. Another question from the document. We talked a little bit about this on budgeting, but how detailed should budgets be? Do I need to go from the itemized, like what the 20,000 would be used for, or is there a leeway, given we just don't know how things may be? Yeah.
For us, we don't require any budget listing at all. It's just so far immediately you get 5,000 at a certain point, you get another 5,000 at completion, you get 10. And the assumption is you use it as needed to produce the work.
Yeah, for us, I would like to see anything is relevant to tell us how you're gonna approach the story. Which means you don't need to tell me like to super details, but I do want to know, for example, in this trip, you'll stay 7 days in the city and you will plan to use public transportation for the 7 days. So how much that public transportation part is. Or if you're deciding that that 7 days I'll take taxi, then you do need to reflect that in your budgeting. Those little things you might think are not that relevant, but it actually shows how you're going to approach the story, whether or not you have considered, for example, safety, or for example, how much comfort level you are in the community. Those kind of things that are embedded in the budget, like little items that you might not really think about. Or if you have multiple team members, budget them in that way is important. I also would recommend if you're applying grants to us or some similar organizations that you have a very big project, break it into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So it gives you a little bit more chance of being considered, because if we look at the whole total budget, often what I see is this person needs 25,000 to produce this story, and there's no way I can find a budget works. This budget works for me in my program for 25,000 to give to this. So what I would do usually, if I'm still interested in the story, I would go back to the person saying, how about you break it into 3 parts and let's fund the first phase. That happens often, and if the journalists have already thought about it and thinking, okay, this is the part I need right now, and then I'll move on to the second phase. That's also useful. So if you're applying for something really big, unless Mike has like a 20,000 right away, but you should consider to break it apart, so the grant organizations can look into it to see whether or not they can just fund portion of it at least to help you get started.
One way to think about it, it's a slight variation, would be for 20,000, that's maybe 4 to 8 weeks of field time producing work. Typically, on average, if it's very local, it's longer. If it's extensive travel, it's less time. So part of what I'm saying is the scope of what you're proposing has to match the level of the grant. So you wouldn't, like, I want to travel to 8 countries and spend 2 years doing this, and this will, $20,000 is going to let me do that. That's probably not realistic, and you most likely won't get it. But if you said, I want to use this grant as part of a larger project in which I will be traveling to all of those countries, but with this, I will do this with this grant, then that's a real possibility. It suggests, wow, you mean we could help advance a massive project like that? That would be great. And it's clearly doable. And the work you're showing shows that you can produce work at that level. And then the proposal you've written shows us, wow, you're an expert on this, so those are some of the variables as well.
Thank you. You know, Sierra, I saw that you dropped your tracker, which is amazing. And Aterrible is a great resource to keep yourself um, organized. For your oh, there you are. I was like, you moved. So with that, you know, how I guess how long or how often do you go searching for grants? Is there a particular grant season, or are grants just popping up throughout the year? Where do you look for them? You know, how do you, I guess, just do it?
Well, outside of my own practice, I am a community manager at a visual arts incubator for Black women artists. So I am searching for grants and resources and opportunities on a regular basis. And generally those are visual arts based. And so I have my own like criteria that I'm looking for that kind of like filters out like when it really worked for them. Because a lot of people go into looking for grants just based on a number, but they're not really looking really based on those eligibility and like requirements. And so that's where a lot of people get I guess fatigued or decision fatigued about applying for grants, because they don't have either the scope or the requirements that they're looking for, like filtering in their head all the time. And so generally I look um, at like arts publications. Creative Capital is pretty good, local arts organizations here in Atlanta. Um, and then also anything national that I come across. Like, I mean, I've never heard of the Alexa Foundation, but I'm probably going to apply and send it to a few people just from hearing about it now. So it just comes with grants are always rolling. They're always coming around, and the fiscal seasons for depends on your city as well. So if you're an artist that's working that wants to work within the city constraints of where you live or local constraints, then it's good to understand what are those fiscal seasons. So I know here in Atlanta, it's like June to June. And so that's when budgets are approved. So usually you would have to apply before those fiscal seasons starts or before their budgets are approved. So that also gets into kind of you understanding how budgeting and the financial side works of it. Otherwise, you'll just keep missing the deadlines. And then also having an application tracker like that is that like where even if I miss deadlines for this year, I would still have them um, for next year to see their deadlines. Like, oh, I missed that deadline, but I know it might be coming up the next September. Or even saving it on like sometimes I'll save it on my calendar for the next like month of I would like normally look at it to where it's like it'll pop up as a notification. And so that's pretty much what has also made it easier. Just making the application tracker is making sure that I'm following up on deadlines that are like rolling. Um, and then also, I mean, it's like, what are you looking for at the time? What project are you focusing on? And what do you really want to work on? And not necessarily saying that like you need money. And where do those grants like align? Um, and then just following people that like look at grants all the time or following or emailing. Jen and Mike just dropped their emails and things. So like just following up with them and saying, hey, do y'all have any other grants that you're looking at, or any other colleagues that you can put me in touch with that are also great resources for funding and things. So it's a mix between like doing your own research and then just doing strategic research, really.
That's great.
Apparently,
Sorry, go ahead.
we did both put our emails in. I'm happy to send me an email and say, you know, here's what I'm thinking. You think it's worth applying, and if you send a link to pictures, that would be helpful too. But I'm happy to respond.
Amazing.
Yeah, I would say also just you know, regular grant organizations newsletter, making sure you subscribe to all of them. and international work, a lot of people look at IJNet, and others, honestly, I would also agree with Sierra on the how you first coming up with a project first and know that's what you want to work on, because often I talk with the journalists that when they talk about their project, I can tell them, I don't think your project is something I could fund, but on top of my head, when they describe what they are looking for, what kind of project they want to produce, I immediately can think of a few other places they might be able to look into. And that usually is a match. So I would say familiarize yourself with those grants, throughout the year, with all those organizations throughout the year. So knowing what typically are the things they're funding, and then when you have a project that probably will come up pretty quickly, and knowing that organization is the one you want to apply a grant from. But then again, it's, subscribe to every newsletter as possible. That will be my tip.
I can share with you, Polly, a document that Kim Kamenich out of San Francisco State puts together of many, many, many grants on a calendar to share with your membership.
That'd be amazing. Thank you. To go along with the questions, let me see. Now to the nitty gritty, when you're writing a grant for IWMF, Alexia, or whoever, should it be written in first person or third person?
Doesn't matter for us.
Would it be like standard practice to be in first person?
Generally,
go ahead, Mike.
Generally, yeah, but you limit the I and the me stuff to 3 times. So if you are mentioning yourself, do it in a more journalistic sense, writing in a journalistic, not necessarily, but it's not about you. So keeping your voice out of it, yourself out of the proposal, I think is important. It's sort of like some people can get kind of preachy. Like, I don't think this is right. I think it's awful and this shouldn't happen. And that tends to make it about them, or they can be kind of like sociologists and be very pulled back, and it's makes it kind of dry and boring. So the energy that you put into it is about you, and the awareness and the knowledge is about you. So you don't have to put yourself into it literally, I think.
What are you gonna say,
there are specific questions we ask about you, obviously, in the application. So we ask about how this is gonna help you in your career. Those kind of questions that you have to answer as a first person. So I don't really mind you write in whichever way you want to, as long as you explain well of the topic and the story you're going to report on.
I would say the format is dramatically different from an artist statement. And if you read the Alexia proposals that are in the photo stories section, you'll see the difference.
Going down the questions, what are just some of the common mistakes that people have when submitting grants, to you all, or that you have come across that, that would, just whether it's silly mistakes or just unknown mistakes, what have you seen, Jen and Mike, that we can avoid?
That's, go ahead.
I can think of one example. 3 women journalists photographers who recently applied to our grant, and actually we did an interview with them. But from the interview and from the application, they mistakenly failed to explain how exactly that story going to be produced between 3 photographers. So until the end, which I was the one interviewing them. For me, it was pretty clear just having, maybe I didn't really ask them that question in the interview, but when our committee review the interview and then review their application again, had the question of how they're gonna present the story. And it's interesting because nowadays a lot of photographers are not only do photos because COVID, they are also doing a lot of other, reporting, like writing and producing like multimedia story. But that was a clear piece missing in the application, and it cost them heavily that they did not receive the grant after like 3 rounds of review. So that would be one of the examples. That's why I really recommend you guys to have a couple of people read your application before you apply, because even though you might be working with like, other 2 photographers on the same project, you might still miss information between 3 of you because you're all very deep down looking into like what's in front of you, and you need a kind of a bird's eye view to read those.
There are a few things. Skip mentioned some of them. The idea of nowness. If there's no urgency or currency to what you're proposing, know if what you're proposing is a cliche, and if it is a cliche, an often photographed topic, understand how your approach to it is going to bring freshness to that topic, and it will enlighten. Making sure the scope of what you're proposing is realistic within the context of the grant, not being pedagogical or sociological or preachy. A critical thing is, if the grant is to produce work, know what is left to photograph. In other words, be able to make a pitch as to what you're going to produce with the grant. I've read a bunch of synopses, or we require, and this year I'm expanding it, so there's an opening paragraph that you ought to be able to read that paragraph and have a solid understanding what your project is about. So if that paragraph doesn't make it clear what you're going to do, you're starting down not a good path.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Oh, I wanted to add that really, like, just unless you're applying for artist or like photography specific focused grant, basically just assume the judges or the committee don't really know much about photography. Like, because there is always a mixed, committee that might have a couple of people who know photographers pretty well, and then, or who are photographers or photo editors, but then you always have a bunch of people in the committee that don't really know photography as much. They have different background as broadcasters, as print people. So like when you explain your project, really think about how you explain that to someone who has no knowledge of photography. Explain if you're using, a different format of film, and you are telling it in a different way, like really tell us why this is significant, or why this approach is different with the previous approaches. Obviously, like explain that well is really important, because again, like I think a lot of time when we turn down a project, the photographer didn't like maybe have mentioned my approach is unique, but like if we're not all photo experts, you just have to explain a little bit more on that.
Thank you. Oh, were you going to say something else?
Just a variation of if you can find out how a specific grant judges, that can be very helpful as to how you prepare. And most directors of competitions and grants are happy to talk to you and answer questions that you might have. Alexi has judged the proposal. Now the synopsis, that opening paragraph, is going to be read as the pictures are going to be presented. So there has to be synchronicity between those two. So what you can do is read your proposal or have someone else read your proposal as you're starting to look at the pictures. We ask for up to 20 to be submitted. And ask yourself, does that make sense? Does that flow well? The other thing, picking up on Jin said, have someone else read your proposal and then ask them, tell them to put it down and ask them to summarize it, what you're proposing. And that'll tell you whether you're being clear. And if they're off or on or in parts or whatever, that's a good way to revise it to a finer point.
Now, you both have mentioned, having a project in mind or having a project that you've already worked on when, submitting a grant. Rocket has asked, how does one present a photo project that still is in its early stages? How does a photographer show they can finish a grant project without any prior grants?
We often fund people who have never been funded by other people. I think almost it's in a way of against the establishment in some way of our judging process that we often hear, because we don't we really compare with some, even compare with my previous organization, Pulitzer, we have much smaller grant size. So for LMF, we often think, if we don't fund this, would someone else fund it? And if that person had clearly never done grant work before, we probably would assume, if we don't fund her, she would not get a grant somewhere else. And that's actually played into your favor and then, into your disadvantage. But I do want to know, putting in the research, I know it's unpaid work and we are very aware of that, so we don't really want to ask too much, but you do have to show you've done research, and that research will help you to identify what are you going to shoot on and how you're going to get there, and how you're going to have access. And those are very important questions. At the same time, people applying, photographers often apply a project that having a great proposal at the end, the publication plan is exhibition. Just letting you guys know we're not funding exhibitions. So you just have to publish it somewhere, and we don't need you to have a firm publication plan. At LMF, you can just tell us where you're pitching, and we're just gonna look at your previous work and see whether or not it's at that level, or the pitch you wrote to us, whether or not, if I am an editor at a publication, whether or not I'm gonna pick it up. So those things are important for us, that when we look at someone who has not had a grant history, but obviously having a grant in the past or have had a grant from us in the past is not the defining elements for us at all. And I've been pushing towards, since I took over this job, that we push for more feeding new blood into the system, that knowing if that person getting a grant from LMF will help them on their resume in the future to apply for another grant from somewhere else. So that's important for me and for my program.
It's amazing.
That's great.
If you have just started a project, you can submit 3, 5, 7 images on that project. And then if you produced another body of work, you can submit that work to demonstrate, look, I'm more than capable of producing what I'm proposing based on another project I've done. The Alexia has tended to award people earlier in their careers. If you look at the list, you think, oh my gosh, Matt Black and Sarah Blesner, Louis Palou applied 10 or 11 times before he got the grant. So it was continued effort. And
Yeah. Though on our website we said feedbacks are provided limitedly, but if you apply and didn't get it, and you think you wrote a good proposal, and you wonder why you didn't get it, you should just email us. Definitely email and ask, because it's important to get feedback and know, like, there's no way for me to provide feedback for every single person in our system. But you have tried a couple of times, or you have tried it with a really good swing and you don't know why you are not getting it, definitely ask for feedback, because this will help you even you pitch the same project to somewhere else.
That's great. And you all have touched on aspects of this, but we talked about the common mistakes, but what has made something like really go, wow, stand out? Is there anything that you've remembered? Is it from people's, why them, or is it from just the framing of the project itself or their work? What else would make someone stand out when applying for a grant?
When I read a proposal, and after reading that proposal, I have no questions that I can I have very limited questions that I want to ask, and I know I can address that in an interview. That is a good proposal. I think often we read a project, I would have like at least the 5-6 big questions coming up that through a critical eye. But then I know that person probably would not advance to the next level in our process. And I want to talk a little bit about, we do also have a 20,000 offering for Anna Niederinghaus for a photojournalism award. That one opens once a year, usually in between March and February. For that one, you submit, and it's a gift basically if you're selected. But I do want to say, like for regular grants, you just need to answer any question that people might want to ask, and that's why I ask you to have someone else to read your proposal, because they will ask those questions, and you can go back to your proposal and edit them.
One way to answer that question would be that each phase of the process leaves the judges satisfied but wanting more. So in the title, you understand what the project is about, but it leaves you curious. And if you look at the titles from the Alexias, you can see that. I would tell you that almost universally one-word titles don't work. And there have been many of those. 2-word titles almost never work. And literal titles tend not to. So just look at those titles and see, well, why do those work for you? And could you create a parallel version for yours? Then you have to, the opening paragraph, there are basically 2 ways that you can open a paragraph in a grant proposal, I think. One, you create word pictures. You can take people on a journey by explaining a setting or introducing us to a person that is the heart of what your project is about. And we're left going, oh my God, this is amazing. This is whatever it is. But and then the other approach is describing a situation or a fact more descriptively or factually that makes you feel, oh my God, this is so important. This must, okay, what's next? What do I read next? So literally that kind of, each one is like a fish hook, and pull them in, fish hook, pull them in to the next layer. I'm not a fisherman. I don't know where that analogy came from, but.
I have 2 follow-up questions, and I see your question in the chat, Audrey, that I will get to ask, but I want to ask Sierra, before she has to head off. Sierra, you've applied, like I said, for grants. You received over 10K for grants. What's the biggest lesson you've learned in the process of writing a grant, applying for a grant, whatever, you name it, in this process?
I think the biggest lesson is probably one that mostly Jen has been like harping on, just being very thorough about the project. And because well, most of what I've been applying for this year has been COVID related. So I have a general like COVID statement that I started with, and then just expanding on that. And so my I guess my fish line, my fisherman philosophy with that is that I kind of lead with how much I have lost, how many contracts that I've lost. So while I'm a photographer and an archivist, I also do digital marketing. And so those contracts that I lost were totaled over 15,000 for the year. And so when someone sees that I've lost $15,000, they want to say, "Oh, our $1,000 grant is just minimum, but it'll help her do something." And so that having like a statement of loss um, has kind of helped, so I don't necessarily like always have to like rewrite that. And then also just the projects that I'm working on or still working on despite that statement of loss. So I've lost over $10,000, but I'm still working towards the exhibitions that I've been proposing. I'm still working with Black women artists. I'm still building archives, and how do those things like translate within the budgets that I need to continue working on them. And so I think even just being in practice of just writing and being in practice about writing about like your reality and what you're going through has definitely helped rather than like trying to like start and stop. So even if you're like between projects or even if you're between looking for grants, just like keeping a log of like what is happening um, in your current life and how that is like affecting you, and then you can kind of like piece them all together in those own statements for the grants to like say, hey, I like well did this thing over here, but it makes sense for me to talk about it over here. And then I think once you get past like the law statements and like the amount of money that you need, you can kind of get into the more storytelling part that Mike is getting to. And so I think a lot has what has helped me is to kind of get out of my own head has is more so thinking about the women that I'm documenting and the stories that they have with their work, and how this particular project or how me leading the project will help further their work. So it's really not about me and the things that I'm proposing or the things that I'm documenting, but more so the impact that it has to help other people succeed.
That's great. And are you when you're applying for grants, are you applying like under your name or as an individual or business name, or does
It
it vary?
depends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it depends. And it also depends on the scope of the grant. So sometimes I may apply as a photographer, sometimes I may apply as an archivist, and sometimes I may apply as a digital marketer or a consultant. So it just depends on what the grant is asking for. But these particular ones that Jen and Mike are saying is like I would have to like put on my photographer's hat and say like, okay, what am I working on in photography, and how can I apply that to the general work that I'm doing over there. And so if you do come across grants that aren't necessarily like visual arts related or photography related, then how can you still, I guess, make it a part of the project, right? And so you can say in this particular project, I'm working as a copywriter, but I'm still acting as the lead photographer if it was like copywriting grant or something like that. And so that's also just understanding language and understanding like the scope of the grants and like what particular role do you want to play for that particular grant and project.
One thing I've heard in what you say, Ciro, was one way to address that, why you're the right person to do a given project and therefore to get this grant, is that because of your personal experience or your personal situation, this I have lived, and therefore I am the best person to try to communicate. This is my community, this is my family, this is my life, whatever. Your direct connection to something is often what brings great power to your work. So if you do have that direct connection, please do mention it.
Yeah, if you have the connection, it'll be great. But if you don't, that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell the story. I'm just like thinking of, there's definitely scenarios that you're not from the community, you have not lived there or something, but you still want to report on the issue. Then then when you explain why you are the person, you need to just spend a little bit more work on that, actually digging into why you are the one. I think for photographers of color, probably, if there is a natural connection between you and certain topics, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you're not, like we're not banning you, say you cannot go cover a red state white voter situation, but you just need to explain to me of like why this is important to you and how you're going to approach it, and why, and how you can tell a story through a different view or something like that. That would be interesting. And we hold the other photographers, writers the same. If they are foreigners, if they are American, if they go to a foreign country, where is the connection there, and why you are the person to tell this? It's critical for us. Our committee do come from, there are situations I sit on in a committee call that has no Americans on that call, and so we do view it through our own eyes as, being almost the victimized in certain coverage of foreign countries. So many of our committee members look into that as well, of the why you are the one telling that story in that certain community, and how you can tell the story fairly if you don't have a knowledge there. And maybe the approach would be you pair up with someone on the ground, and really think about the approach from your perspective as well, and explain that in your application.
One example would be Gabriela Arp's project was awarded in 2016. One of her family members was diagnosed with dementia, and so Gabriela had the very personal experience, and she produced a virtual reality piece. It wasn't of her family member, but that her personal experience informed the production of that piece. And that sort of gets at another question, not to preempt your question, Flo. Somebody did ask about, I'm a portrait photographer more, would that be inappropriate? Can I still enter? And yes is the answer. I mean, we're increasingly trying to encourage, not let the story form or the genre drive whether you get awarded or not, but rather what is it you're trying to say, and then what is the best story form. In Gabriela's case, the virtual reality piece was the best way, and it was recognized for that. In another year, the year after that, David Danil, a German photographer, did crafted an illustrative set of photographs that speak to the condition of a country he photographed. So, wasn't documentary at all. And so Riel Sturkio photographed her sister and their twins, and so it was only photographing their lives. So there is a big range of approach.
Yeah, I do want to say one thing about it being very personal. We have some hesitations on on the project if it is super personal. We do want to, because it is a journalism grant, so we wanted to see your journalistic approach. If the topic itself is very personal to you, maybe also explain how you will approach it with a journalistic heart. That's also important, so you don't get wrapped too much into those scenarios that you don't have as much control, and getting too much emotions into it is also important.
I still remember your question, Audrey, and I still remember my follow-up to you, Mike. I do have a follow-up for Sierra. One thing you said about writing. Would you recommend, or this can be actually for all of you, but do you have any tips or recommendations on how to, just improve our writing when applying, or just being better as writers? Because oftentimes I feel like, with photographers, we get so wrapped up on just taking the photos, then all the other aspects with photography, with writing, with the business, with marketing, because we just want to focus on creating, but writing is a part of that. So do you have any, tips or resources that you use or you have used in the past, or that you recommend to people because maybe they had a good idea, but that just didn't translate into writing, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I would say either start making writing a part of your practice, and that being like a innate part of your practice, like just as much as like you're shooting, just as much as you're looking for subjects, you're taking notes. I mean, from a journalistic standpoint, journalists always have to have a log of things. So you have to know your subjects, you have to know the location, you have to know the time, you have to know who's in the actual photos. And so I think it's just being in practice of studying your work and writing about your work. So if you take your photos, just take time to look at your photos and say, this was the time I took the photo at. This is the person who's in the photo. This is the location the photo was at. This is how the location felt during that time, and the setting of the location, and just really digging deep into your work beyond the visual, and being able to understand those particular elements, just as like you want to be able to know just as much as that's involved in the photograph as you would to hand it off to a copywriter, because a copywriter doesn't necessarily know anything about the work. They're just editing the words and making it succinct. But you're the person that's giving them the information. It's not their job to look at the photo and say, this is what's happening within the photo. So I would just get in practice of writing about your photography and writing about it, regardless if it's documentary or portraiture or lifestyle. Just get in practice of writing about what is actually happening in your work. And if that, it doesn't have to be anything robust. It, just like I said, it could be the time, the location, the person, and any other details that you may have about it. And then over time, you can kind of expand that. But generally, that's what I try to stick to. And I guess with other artists, I kind of try to get them to get away from the narrative part. Actually, that also helps. So Jen was talking about how like the why, the how, and the when. And just be very clear and concise about those things, and not try to get too narrative about it, because sometimes also you have word limits to stay within. So if you only have 500 words to use, then you have to like use them like concisely.
Don't use all those I's and me's like Mike said.
Yeah.
Okay, Audrey, I hope I'm saying your name right. Your question was, do you think it's better for someone in the field or outside of the field of expertise to read through the grant proposal before submitting, or is it both better? Because you both have mentioned having people review, our grant applications. What would be best? As who should
I would recommend photographers to find a writer to review your application. Not only helping you to edit it, but also at the same time, someone who knows journalism or knows reporting and then at the same time, like knowing that don't know enough about photography or about your photojournalism approach would be helpful. Or you know, I also just want to add on what just being said about writing. Grant writing is a very specific skill, so don't feel bad if you're not good at it. That's completely normal. No one is perfect, and I think even very established journalists who have gotten a lot of grants under their belt still sometimes submit applications are poorly done. So you know, practice definitely make it perfect. Just try to tell your other projects in your own words on the side before you write a major grant application. Try to practice that, and be very short is always good. Like, even though we don't have I don't think I have a word limit on my application form, but if you write very, very long, I need to go back and forth still trying to find information. That's not a good sign.
Mike,
There are grant writing workshops, just that there are grant writing workshops, but you have to be careful because grants, there's such a broad spectrum of kinds of writing and types of requirements. And there are grants to get educational things and any number of them. So if you do approach a workshop, make sure it's for exactly what you're looking for. And there people are very good at teaching that, for sure. That general idea of having at least 3 people from different skill sets and perspectives reading your proposal is a really good idea.
And my follow-up question to you earlier, you know, you mentioned one person who, you know, I think was 11 tries after they, you know, tried, they finally received, you know, the grant at the Elixir Grants. You know, when that person was applying, did they use the same grant proposal? Like, if you don't get something, you know, is it encouraged to, you know, resubmit the same, you know, proposal every year, or should they switch it up? Or yeah.
There are different judges every year, so it's not like, oh, this again kind of thing isn't going to happen. What Louis said is that he got better at it each year. The proposal wasn't the same every year. There was probably some repetition. It was before I became director, so I didn't see it firsthand, but I asked him after, and the process teaches you how to do the process better. So, and I think Jen suggested if you can reach out after the fact and ask over time, I've applied and I'm not getting any results. Can you offer some feedback? And I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah. I think Louis in those 11 tries also tried many other organizations, and he has gotten many. So, so that's I think if you're applying with the same thing, same idea, I want to see improvement. Because if there's no improvement, no development, it's only the same writing, very likely it will be turned on again. I don't think even with different set of judges, they probably are judging on a similar value. And if there is a clear hole in the first time, I don't think the second time the judges will ignore that or don't see it. So if you apply to the same grant multiple times, you probably just like really need to show your improvement in that, either through your skill set improvement or the way how you explain things are getting better. And I definitely have seen that in many people who have tried our programs. And honestly, seriously don't feel bad if you get turned down. Like, we only have that much money. It's not a lot of money, and there are hundreds of people are applying. Like, good project proposals can still be turned down because we have decided to find something else. So keep trying is the key, and just never feel bad about it. It's a key as well. Like, you know, many journalists that don't get it, even our very established ones.
Now,
One thing,
go
just
ahead.
sitting next to judges year after year, you can sort of see the gears turning their head, and they're wondering, okay, what is the level of the work, of the imagery? Is that strong enough to show that this person could produce a really powerful body of work? Do I think what they're proposing is important enough to recognize that topic is the right person to do that? And there were a series of questions like that you can just see the judges, like this one versus that one and that one and that one. And it's a fascinating process. If you can sit in on judging, ours is usually open when it's in person. I haven't decided whether to open it up through Zoom this year. It's a remote judging. But that's a good thing.
Yeah, if you can sit on any grant judging or award judging, you should sit on there just to learn. Because I think even though I've reviewed the grants for many years, and this year is the first year I was sitting in the photography award judging, and that day I learned so much more, even as a grant maker. So I would encourage everyone to try. If you have that opportunity, definitely try it. And like if you don't have those opportunities, that's totally fine. Like not everyone living in New York City that have access to all these judges, and email people, ask nicely if they want to provide, they can provide feedbacks. I would say usually most people I know in the grant world would provide feedback if you ask. And honestly, not many people take up on that offer, so should definitely do that.
Now, I do want to be cautious of Jen and Mike's time since we have been talking for an hour and 20 minutes, but this has been great. I want to, open it up. We have 30 people currently who are still with us. Anybody have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. We are here to help, so feel free to ask. No question is too dumb, seriously. Go ahead.
So I really appreciate everyone's time. This has been really informative. I feel like from the questions and what's been discussed in this Zoom call, I feel like a lot of people are semi-professional or professional to some extent. I myself, I'm on my iPhone right now, and I very much enjoy photography as a hobby, but I think in terms of growing from doing it as a hobby to applying for grants and actually being competitive for grants, I was wondering, and this is open to anyone in this Zoom call, if anyone has any tips on how to build that portfolio and gain credibility in this field. And just for reference, I'm also a college graduate.
That's a great question. I don't know who wants to take a stab at it.
I can start since I worked with students and still working with a lot of early career folks outside of IMF as well. I think one of the things, if you're going to apply for IMF grant, I would recommend you to start publishing small projects here and there. No matter it's your local publication, no matter it's national publication, if you don't get that level, it's totally fine. Start somewhere, start publishing somewhere, and they're gonna put you in front of more people, and then they're gonna put you in front of more editors. You'll receive more feedbacks. If you are starting to build your own project, to try to submit for portfolio reviews, getting more feedback and helping, like getting into some associations like this, to have other colleagues and peers to provide, either resources, connections, and then really just look into your work with a critical eye that will help you grow. That's important. yeah, most of the IMF grant require 3 years of experience, but that's a softer bar. I would want to recommend people to apply even if you don't have 3 years under your belt, but start from something smaller than $20,000 projects. It will be helpful.
It's worth saying too, the Alexia has a student grant. You just have to be actively pursuing a degree, whether it's community college, undergraduate, graduate, or postgraduate. And the professional side, there is a requirement that you do at least half of your income off of visual content production of some form. To grow into the profession, I wish there were a manual or something that just said, oh, do this. Because everybody I've ever known has done it differently. Inevitably, it's connecting with a valuable thing is to connect with a mentor or someone who is willing to stay connected with you and give you feedback and guidance as to the work you're producing and how to go about doing that. And also, who do you talk to? How do you get published? What's the process for that? I mean, grad school can do that too if you're able and willing to do that kind of commitment. Connecting with a local publication can be helpful. It depends widely on the quality of that publication. Any opportunity to produce images and get them out in the world has value. Competitions are helpful. Most competitions, you don't have to be a professional, or many of them. And there are more competitions than ever. It's amazing how many there are.
Anybody else have any questions?
Thank you all for your answers.
It's a safe space. Ask away.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
If it's echoey, I'm at work, sorry. Is the Alexia grant specifically for photojournalists, people who go out into the field with projects for like publications, or can a like photographic artist apply, like someone who actually does like gallery shows type of things?
Yes, to the second part of your question, a great range of types of people enter. It tends to go to people who produce documentary or socially significant work that depicts life happening in front of the person who made the picture. It tends to, but I'm increasingly trying to select judges who can respond to a wider range of work, and then in the conversation about the work, encouraging them to open a little wider perspective. Again, and back to the awarded work, Jian Nang from, I forget where in China she's from, but she produced a more illustrative, art-driven kind of body of work, and that was awarded. Cult of Womanhood by Tabitha Barnard. She was a MFA student. It was her MFA project. And it was very much controlled situations that spoke to really important aspects of life. So it's, I think I said it sort of before, but what's more important for me is what you're saying, what you're addressing, than the form that you're using to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Any questions? Is everyone feeling ready to apply for grants? Yes,
I
yes.
want to say hello.
I guess oh my goodness. um, let me see. Let me look through the submitted. I think I asked most of them already, or they were touched on in one way or another. I guess would any of you all have any closing thoughts then, or just any other like pieces of advice when it comes to writing, when it comes to seeking, opportunities, when it just comes to, staying persistent, because I know it can be discouraging not receiving something, how I don't even know how that person felt 11 times. Like, I mean, that's like persistence right there. I don't know how to stay motivated with this process. And to some of the points that, if it doesn't work for this particular person, like if it doesn't work for IWMF, should they try it with a different place, and maybe get success there? Just any advice or closing thoughts?
Well, if you get rejected, and you still want to do that project, definitely take it to somewhere else. Because I would like to see many of the projects that I rejected, if they ever get published. That's my honest opinion. And if you get rejected, ask feedback. Like, it's like no harming to send an email to ask. And whether or not that editor or whether or not the grant making person is going to respond, you should still request that. I have a booking calendar on my bio page on IWMF site for Ask Me Anything. So feel free to use that, and also just email me anytime if you have questions about our grant. I also talk with people. I volunteer for many organizations to read their Journals of Colors grant proposals. So if you can't find this, like as Mike said, 3 people to read your application, and it's not IWMF grant, feel free to send to my way as well. I'm happy to read it and at least tell you what my question would be after reading it. So yeah, like not many people take me up on that, which I also find interesting, because I don't think many grant makers are offering that. So don't be shy. That would be my answer.
And I'll send around their information again, so that you all have that as a resource. And I really do emphasize to take them up on, whether it's a one-on-one, whether it's just additional questions or questions you think of after the fact, or when you're applying for something, do take them up on it. They respond really quickly. I'm almost embarrassed of how I'm like, how do you guys respond so quick? And you guys have all this going on. They got back to me quick. I mean, the same day I asked about something, Jen said, let's host a meeting, and then like the other day, Mike said, yes, I can hop on. So they get back to me quickly. And so they are very responsive, but do know that they do have lives. But do take them up on their generous offer to meet one-on-one, to answer any questions along the way. And Sierra has also put her information. I will drop that. I will send it later as well. I'll include Sierra's information. But anyone else, any other advice, any other closing thoughts, any other questions as we wrap up here?
I guess I would say just keep applying. If you look in the tracker, like there's over $83,000 of applications that I've like either considered or looked at. But I've only received $10,000 of it, and that's not $10,000 in like liquid cash. That's also including like opportunities and just like memberships and things like that. So the value of it doesn't necessarily always come in cash, but it can come in like resources and different things. And so the money is there. We live in a capitalistic society, so it's there's no like I guess there's a surplus of what you're looking for. It's just a matter of that like you continually looking. and I guess just refining your project is also a thing. So like the person that was doing the 11, like apply the 11 times, every time that you apply, you should just keep refining the thing that you're working on, or make large changes to it. Like your project is like a science experiment. So all these different like changes that you make can be the one that like somebody like responds to the best.
See if I can add three different thoughts. Let me string them all there. The most important one is your voices are really important. What you have to say is extremely important. So I hope you will apply, be out there and be heard. If you don't win this year or next or the year after, that doesn't mean it's not diminishing what you're doing. It's just saying you didn't win this year. Well, 99.9% people don't win. I hate the word win, but continue to refine, continue the passion. Everybody I know who is at the top tier in this profession is just dauntless, just in the pursuit of clarity and power of voice. And I'm betting everybody in this space can accomplish that. It just takes time, energy, and focus. I wanted to make sure my wife walked in the room, which reminded me, in case you don't know about it, there's a brand new organization called The 19th, and it's a women-focused organization. My wife is the product designer for them, and it just launched, about 3 weeks ago. They held a summit in which Kamala Harris and some of the most powerful women voices in the world were part of this summit. And it is a news organization that's growing day by day, and they will need your voices. So I can figure out a way for you all to connect as appropriate through Polly, I guess.
That'd be amazing. Thank you. Anybody on the call have any, I see some comments thanking everyone, which is great. You know, does anyone have a takeaway that they learned, or that they'll, action item that they'll do to be more successful in this process? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, Polly, it's Anjanelli. This was such a great, hopefully you guys can hear me, I'm driving.
Yeah.
But no, this is really great takeaway, because I'm starting as a project, like I told you, but I learned a lot, even if I don't apply to this particular grant, but just really put in perspective the things that I need for my particular project, and just in case if I do find a grant down the line that can help me get it to the finish line. Now I know what to do. So I do appreciate this Zoom call, and you guys answered great, asked great questions and answered it really straight to the point, which helped a lot. So thank you for putting it together, and the panelists as well too.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, if there's nothing else, Jen just dropped her calendar where you can directly schedule. Mike dropped the 19th news. I personally love this stuff. I get their newsletter. And so I'll connect with you, Mike, offline about that. And I will also send their information again. And I will also send this recording, so don't feel like you had to remember everything, digest, this information. I will send this recording around to you all, or you can use it as a resource to go back to. And yeah, thank you, everyone. I think that's it, right? Yeah. All
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.